I'm Clive Rossfield, brother and shield of Joshua, and you're watching Primalliquid.
What's going on, everybody? Final Fantasy XVI is here, and right now we are going to talk about the good, the bad, and the glaringly bad in this review. However, before we actually start that, I do just want to say Square Enix did provide me a copy for review purposes. However, that will in no way affect my opinion or anything like that. As mentioned earlier, there are some glaring problems and we will be covering them. Also, I did record the vast majority of the game on version 1.00. There was, however, an update for version 1.02 just the other day. I have reached out to Square for patch notes for them. However, at the time of recording this, they have not replied. So some things on this list might be slightly different because of that update. However, from my experience playing on 1.02 the last day or so, I can't say I've noticed any big changes that would affect this review. So let's jump into it, shall we? And I think the very first thing that we need to talk about is the combat in general. So the combat is something we've experienced over the demo, where we did the flashback with younger Clive, and we also had access to the actual combat trial, essentially, where we were going through to fight Benedicta. However, in terms of the actual full game itself, while combat is fluid and action-filled, there are a few little problems as well. Firstly, some fights do take a little too long. Now, I know this is an opinion and a view that a lot is shared from the Benedicta demo. However, that is against an enemy that has a stagger bar. So again, that is kind of normal for those fights to take a little bit longer than most, and I'm perfectly okay with the stagger bar enemies. However, later on in the game, some enemies, even just common enemies with stagger bars, do take just way too long to actually defeat compared to the actual rewards such as EXP, AP, or even item drops that you get from them. Some can take anywhere from, 30 to 40 seconds. Some can take anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. And these are just typical enemies. They are not mini bosses. They are not bosses. Some of the bosses can be 5 to 10 minutes long. And these are not important story bosses or anything like that. Just typical bosses. So I do think some of the fights are unfortunately subject to a little bit of HP bloat, but that is something that can be overlooked because the combat is fun, it is fluid, it is dynamic, it is action-packed, and it is stylish. It looks absolutely beautiful once you start really getting the icon abilities and start chaining them together in what is essentially a never-ending combo. You also have AI party members that will assist you during combat, and then you also have the lovely Torgal as well. Torgal is pretty much with you the entire game, and he will also have his own combo abilities that you can use either at the end of your combo or in the middle of your combo. This takes the amount of combos you can do in the game from just hundreds up to thousands, multiple thousands of different combos. If you want to master the combat in this game, then be prepared to spend months, if not years, perfecting it. It's not hard to dodge an attack, okay? You'll have that mastered very, very quickly. However, if you want to master all the combos, yeah, it's gonna take a long time. However, speaking of combos and speaking of a long time, this brings us to one of the first major issues in Final Fantasy XVI, and that is how long it takes to unlock icons. So, as we know from the demo, Clive starts with just the Phoenix. Now, that is all you are going to have for the 6 to 8 hour mark. And once you've got that icon, the one after that is around the 12 to 15 hour mark. So there are very, very big gaps between them. And while you only have 1 or 2 icons, combat can most definitely feel very limiting and a little slow, a little boring, especially once you've used your abilities and then you just have to wait for them to come off of cooldown. Now, there are some accessories you can use to reduce the cooldown, but until you actually get your third icon, it does most definitely feel like it drags a little bit. Once you actually get your third icon, and later though, then combat really opens up and really it does become an extraordinarily fun, just murder session. Essentially, that is where the combat goes from being kind of slow, just like, you know, a slash and dodge and so on and so forth, to really, okay, let's just blow everything up pretty much. So overall, when it comes to combat, I do think it is incredibly fun. It is action filled. It looks amazing, but it can be incredibly slow at the start of the game until you unlock your second and third icons. The difference between the start and about 15 to 20 hours in is astronomical, basically. So try not to judge the combat based on just 1 icon worth of gameplay. Wait until you actually get the third one, and then you'll see it start to really pick up. But I do agree that the combat itself can get boring early on. Now, let's move on to graphics. Now, graphics is a little bit of a polarizing subject, mainly with regards to the motion blur that people experienced in the demo and some FPS drops. Now, in terms of how the game actually looks, it is incredibly beautiful. There's a lot of detail added that really didn't necessarily need it. You know, you could be out looking over the distance and you can still see detail added into the distance objects, rather than just being sort of low polygon fillers that they don't really expect people to look at. You can really see a lot of attention to detail has been applied everywhere in this game, and at no point did I really ever find something used a low quality model or was just sort of filler, basically. So I will give them a lot of credit for how the game actually looks. However, with regards to how the game looks, there is one problem, and that is enemy models. Now, Final Fantasy is a game that normally has tons and tons of enemy models. However, this time, unfortunately, there is not. Not counting bosses, there are only about 12 different enemies. Okay, and when I say 12 different enemies, I mean 12 different models. There are reskins of these enemies with different names at higher levels, but ultimately you're going to spend the vast majority of the game fighting wolves, hornets, and vampire plants. That is not including the bosses or anything like that. Some other very commonplace enemies are dragon types and human soldiers. Typically, what I just said there, those 5 types, make up about 90% of the enemies that you are going to fight throughout the game. Just, they're going to have different names, different color palettes, and different levels. Some of them will have different abilities, but those are few and far between. Now, when it comes to motion blur, okay, motion blur is something that can set a lot of people off with travel sickness, and that is a problem that a lot of people experienced during the demo. However, recently, Naoki Yoshida has said in an interview he has got the team working on a patch to reduce the motion blur. However, what I can say is, while actually going through the game, you do notice the motion blur early on, but once you're a couple of hours into it, you actually stop noticing it. And in fact, even now when I just try to play normally, I can't actually notice the motion blur because I've just become so used to it. And it is also dependent on, one, what setting you use. You can have either performance mode or graphics mode. On performance mode, the motion blur is most definitely way less noticeable at any point of the game. However, that does take us into our second point, FPS drops. And this is a really, really weird one, okay? So while playing on graphics mode, a mode that optimizes the entire settings for graphics specifically, you would think that this mode itself would have FPS drops. However, that's not true. Okay, the amount of FPS drops I've noticed while playing the game on graphics mode can be counted on one hand, and even when those happen, it is only for a couple of seconds, if that. Okay, it's very, very short time frames. However, the problem occurs more when you're playing on performance mode. Performance mode should be optimizing the game to run at a higher frame rate all the time. However, that is not the case. During performance mode, you will most definitely experience a lot more FPS drops. So you're essentially trading good, amazing quality for FPS drops. It boggles the mind why the setting has such a glaring issue. So what I would honestly say is just ignore performance mode and play on graphics mode. The game looks way better and you don't get any FPS drops. Honestly, I think the addition of graphics and performance modes is rather silly, to be honest, because graphics mode is pretty much flawless. So I would honestly say use that instead of performance mode just to avoid the FPS drops, but then also you get a better looking game. Now on to music. Now what can we say? Okay, Soken is a freaking god. That is honestly the easiest way to put it. Now, across Final Fantasy as a whole, we are on the 16th title, not including all of the spin-off games. There are so many tracks in Final Fantasy. Like, each individual game typically has anywhere from 100 to 250 plus music tracks. And out of all of them, there will be a few that you absolutely love, some that you are okay with, and some that you really dislike. Final Fantasy XVI changes that, okay? Now, obviously, music is down to everybody's own opinion. However, I have gone through the entire game and not once have I found a bad music track. You can very easily just sit there at the hideaway using the orchestrion, listening to the music all day, every day. They are tracks that invoke emotion. They build hype during critical parts of the story. They make intense fights way more intenseful. Honestly, without the music arrangements, this game would be a terrible, terrible product. The music makes it. It brings it all together. It is the glue that just makes it perfect, essentially. Honestly, the music is hands down 10 out of 10. So far, I've not found a track that I did not enjoy. And I really, really wish I could tell you guys my absolute favorite track. However, it would kind of be a spoiler. Well, I suppose it's not really a spoiler, actually. My favorite track so far is the Odin icon. I mean, that one, we all knew that's in the game, so that's not really a spoiler. But yeah, that is absolutely my favorite track. You guys have something amazing to look forward to. However, that does bring us upon the next category, the story. Now, at the start of this video, I mentioned there was a glaring issue with Final Fantasy XVI. It's not the story, okay? The story is a Final Fantasy story. It is really, really good. The problem is the pacing. Now, the pacing for Final Fantasy XVI is, unfortunately, god awful. Okay, this is, you can tell it was a Final Fantasy XIV team that designed this, okay, because it suffers from A Realm Reborn and early Heaven's Ward issues, in that you will get a little bit of story and then you'll get a few hours worth of bloat. You'll get a little bit more story, a few hours worth of bloat, and it's very, very annoying and distracting. Something super important can be going on in the world and you think, okay, it's time. things are about to get real here. And then you have to go off and do 3 hours worth of quests that should 100% not be in the main story. They are purely and obviously filler. They are fluff, and it is one of the most annoying things early on in the game. There is so much padding, it is unreal. However, if you can get past the early part of the game, if you can get past sort of the first 15 to 20 hours on the little bits of information that the game gives you, then you are in for a treat. Okay, the game is building up from pretty much as soon as you start all the way through. The only problem is during that build up, there are sections where you have to leave the main story. Now, once you get past that build up and the story starts to unravel, you start to get more information. It is amazing. Okay, we all thought this was going to be Clive's story about revenge. That is the way the game was marketed. That is what everybody has been saying. That's what Ben Starr himself said in the interview I did with him. That is part of the story, but like in typical Final Fantasy fashion, there is a hidden, deeper storyline involved, and that is the main storyline for Final Fantasy XVI. What I can say is there were so many twists, turns, and unexpected moments in the game that every time we got to one of those good story bits, I was on the edge of my seat. I just wanted to know what was going to happen next. I needed to continue. I needed to see what was about to happen, whether it was in relation to character events or whether it was in relation to a big story reveal. There is so much that just has you gripped. Now, this is one of the good things about the team being CBU free. Okay, it really highlights how the Final Fantasy XIV storyline was told. Trailers are misdirecting you in the way that the story actually goes, but then even though it has all the benefits of the 14 storyline where it's emotionally gripping, it will tear your heart out at times, it is so exciting and hype filled at times, it still suffers from the bloat. And honestly, the easiest way I can compare it, not in terms of what the story is, but in terms of how the story is laid out, is very much like FF14 A Realm Reborn. You'll have story, you'll have bloat. You'll have story, you will have bloat. Luckily enough, once you get to around the 20-25 hour mark, then the bloat does become way less. There is still a little bloat later on in the game. However, you've got to remember, it is a 60 to 70 hour game, okay? So, with that said, once you get sort of to the halfway point, you are almost exclusively into story-only territory. And that is the point that you are absolutely going to be on the edge of your seat. So while there is the bloat issue, I'm in two minds of what to rate for the story, okay? It is hands down one of the best storylines in Final Fantasy, but it's cursed by bloat. I honestly think they need to make some kind of patch to remove some of these bloat-filled quests, because they add nothing to the story whatsoever. Or just keep the quests and turn them into side quests. That would make this literally perfect in my opinion, but because of the absolutely disastrous bloat issues, I'm gonna have to rate this around an 8 out of 10 for the story. It's honestly a crying shame. It's one of the best storylines in Final Fantasy history, but it was ruined by excessive early bloating. Now, I did just talk about side quests. Let's actually talk about them a little bit in detail. Now, you might be surprised that I didn't talk about this in the gameplay side of things. That is because there is another major problem with side quests, and that is the fact that, much like the story, they are bloat-filled. However, early on, all side quests early on are missable, okay? There is a point of no return around the 15 to 20 hour mark where every side quest before that is missable. So early on, make sure you do all the side quests. Don't worry, you will know it is a point of no return because the game will give you a message. So it's not entirely missable. You can't accidentally progress through the story and then miss all these side quests. However, the problem is, the rewards for these early side quests are so freaking bad that there is literally 0 point to doing them. The only reason you would do these side quests is for the story and the lore that they give you. And while yes, the side quests do offer just huge amounts of lore for the world, the characters, the connections between characters, background information on characters. They are incredibly detailed on the world building side. The problem is what the side quests actually involve you doing. Now, if you've played Final Fantasy XIV, you can pretty much just accept the fact that these side quests are almost identical to the side quests in 14. They are often pointless, needless fetch quests that are there for no reason other than to give you something to do, or it's simply a case of, yeah, go here, kill these 3 mobs that are attacking these people. That right there is quite literally 99.9% of the side quests. And then, of course, you also have the usual delivery side quests as well. There is almost no change from this formula, whether you are at the start of the game or at the end of the game. However, luckily enough, later on, okay, once you get past the point of no return, that is where side quests become incredibly worthwhile. You get renown, which you can change for treasures in the hideaway. You get a lot more EXP ability points, a lot more gil, and you also get things like weapons, weapon blueprints. You can upgrade your inventory so you can carry extra potions with you. You can improve the potency of your potions as well. And that just becomes then that some side quests might not be worthwhile doing in terms of reward, but those side quests will offer huge amounts of story for the world and the characters that you are playing with. However, those that don't offer much story offer amazing rewards. And also, the absolute best weapon in the game also comes from side quests. You have to complete side quests to unlock the recipe, and then you do have to complete hunts to get the materials for it. Now, since I just mentioned hunts, let's talk about them. Hunts are honestly really difficult to talk about. They are essentially harder versions of a lot of the mobs that you fight throughout the game. Some of the hunts you unlock are your first experience with that mob, but then you'll fight reskinned versions later on. Others are just typical reskins. There are multiple ranks of hunts, and they range from anywhere from, you know, a 2-3 minute fight to a 6 to 7 minute fight typically. They can be incredibly annoying to find though. You do have slight information via the hunt board, but that really does not narrow it down. In fact, one of the hunts specifically actually took me over 40 minutes to find, because going by the information it gives you, you expect to look in one particular area, but it's not there. Instead, it's close to that area, but not actually in the area. In terms of rewards, they are actually incredibly worthwhile. They offer insanely huge amounts of gil, which is important if you want to buy all the Orchestrion rolls. They offer insanely good EXP as well. AP is debatable. Some offer an adequate amount, some offer nowhere near enough versus the time investment that you spend fighting. And then the rewards most of the time are crafting materials for weapons, armors, and accessories. My big problem with hunts though is they are locked until basically halfway through the game. A feature that they have tried to advertise quite a lot, and you can't access it until sort of a third to halfway through the game. Honestly, that is most definitely one of the glaring issues for sure. It seems like the early game is just lacking a lot, and then once you get to once you get past to let's just say once you get to Clive's final age, that is where everything becomes unlocked. Okay, and that is where everything opens up. You have access to almost everything, and then you can really experience everything that the game has to offer. Unfortunately, prior to then, though, it is lacking. It is bloat filled. You do have some amazing parts of the storyline. It is building the story. You have amazing character interaction and development during this stage as well. Combat is... it can be a bit boring until you unlock your second and third icon, but what can you do? You know, there is no such thing as a perfect thing in this world. So to break everything down, let's do a little TLDR. Firstly, very bloat filled early on. If you can make it past sort of the 15 to 20 hour mark, you're going to absolutely love this game. Combat is a little boring until you unlock more icons. Once you get that, then it does become one of the best combats in the franchise. Story wise, one of the best stories hands down in Final Fantasy history. Okay, literally, it is one of the best storylines in Final Fantasy history. Unfortunately, it's plagued by so much bloat early on, and I really hope they patch out a lot of those bloaty quests, because it is ruining the game for sure. Some people are definitely going to drop this early because of the bloat, and I do think that is a major shame. Unfortunately, it's one of those things, though. If you can make it past the bloat, you are in for a treat of epic proportions. Now, the game looks absolutely beautiful. You will ignore the motion blur very easily, and if you can't ignore the motion blur, just know that they are working on a patch to reduce it and give you options to control that. Also, the music. It's perfect. Soken's a god. We can all agree on that. That's all that needs to be said, really. Soken is absolutely a god. Now, in terms of game rating. Okay, in terms of game rating. Honestly, I want to give this a 10 out of 10. I want to say this is going to be game of the year. Story-wise, it has that ability. It really has that ability. But the bloat ruins it. So ultimately, I'm going to give this game a 9 out of 10. Okay? Once you get past the bloat, then it literally is a 10 out of 10 game. You've just got to suffer for far too long, in my opinion. But that is my view only. And of course, you guys are all entitled to your own opinions. We like different things when it comes to storylines. We like different things when it comes to world building. Maybe you won't find the game as bloaty as I did. Maybe you'll find it more bloaty than I did, or maybe you'll agree. That is entirely up to you. What I would say, though, is I definitely think the game is worth purchasing. Okay? It is an incredibly fun game, and there is so much to do. It is highly worth it. Think about it. You could spend $10, $15, pounds, euros to go to the cinema, and you'll enjoy 2 hours of entertainment. Final Fantasy XVI gives you 60, 70, 80, 100 hours of entertainment for £60, and I think it's $70 in America. Highly worth it in terms of a cost to time enjoyment ratio. It's less than $1 or less than £1 an hour. Highly worth it, in my opinion. Now, I do still stand by the fact that I think this is going to be game of the year, but again, let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, if you guys enjoyed this review, then make sure you hit that like button as well. Also, subscribe if you're new around here. I have tons and tons of guides and other videos coming for Final Fantasy XVI that you absolutely will not want to miss. As always, though, everybody, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.